As my tournament recap series for the year of 2022 reaches a conclusion, we are in the penultimate tournament which I played, and that is the National Chess Congress, which is a CCA, Continental Chess Association event, held every Thanksgiving weekend. It's a 6-round tournament, pretty big one in Philadelphia. Now, last year I came in rated 2060, and I scored 4.5 out of 6, which was a pretty good tournament for me. I had gained 30 points then. So this year my goal is to get even better than that, which means I have to score at least 5. So I'm obviously setting some high expectations for myself, but I'm rated about 2100, 2105 actually heading in, playing in the under 2200 section again. First round, I played against a teenager rated just under 1900. Managed to win the game, although it was a little bit bumpy. I kind of sacrificed a pawn in not a very sound way, kind of early in the middle game, but then I managed to outplay him and get the win. And this is now round 2, and I am up against the number 5 12-year-old girl in the country. And actually, to prepare for this game, the games that I managed to find of hers were games that she actually played in the World Under 12 Girls Championship a few months prior to this. So, yeah, definitely we're dealing with a pretty talented young player here. Now, heading into the game, I made the decision. I knew that she was going to be playing d4, and I decided not to play d6, as I sometimes do, and to play knight f6, but not to play a King's Indian, but to actually play d6 here and go for more of an old Indian to sort of try to get her out of theory. And here I play e5, she goes d5, which is one of the ways that white can play, but she's delaying moving out the knight, which, I mean, the old Indian, usually white would play knight f3 here, but she goes d5, I go bishop e7, and actually, funny enough, this is the kind of position that I sometimes get out of the lion with like e4, d6, d4, knight f6, just to show you what I'm saying, e4, d6, d4, knight f6, f3, and sometimes I can get the same position basically this way, but here the pawn is on f3. In this position, I go bishop e7, and I'm expecting that maybe she'll do that, play f3 here, but she goes g3. And this is the first moment where I was basically out of theory, because this is a little bit non-standard. Usually people don't do this because, I mean, the bishop is not going to have a great diagonal if you put it there, and but it's something interesting. So we'll see how the game goes. I go c6 here, kind of challenging the center. She goes bishop g2, castle knight e2, and okay, despite the fact that the bishop is on g2, which is I found a little bit odd, the sort of structure that we get is fairly standard for me, I guess I can say. I go a6 here, looking to expand with b5 at some point. So for example, if she just castled, I was going to take and play b5 here, threatening to attack the knight, and then maybe bring the knight to b6. And, you know, I have less space, but it's a position that I'm happy to play. She decided to clamp down, though, by playing a4, but as white, you have to be a little bit careful here to not overextend, and what I decided to do is trade and now play the move a5, and basically I've carved out the c5 square for myself. Like, the point is that if she had not played a4 and I had done this kind of thing, well, here she can play b4 and stop me from playing the knight on c5. But once I get a5 in, now basically the knight is going to get to c5, and there's nothing that she can do about it. Except maybe play bishop e3, which she did, but if she trades the bishop for the knight, then I am not unhappy to see that. So in this position, perhaps the most accurate move would have been to play queen b6, even though it kind of puts the queen into a position where the knight's now pinned, but it sort of aims to exploit the open area on the queen side here. So, for example, if white plays h3 to stop knight g4, even something like bishop d7 is fine, and at some point, maybe I have ideas like queen b3, queen b4 to attack the e4 pawn. I could bring the rook to c8. I decided, though, to play b6 because my idea was to get this bishop to a6 and try to pressure on this diagonal, try to exploit this kind of weak d3 square. And she played h3 here, which again kind of aims to stop knight g4, but also I started to think, what if she wants to begin expanding on the king side? What if she wants to play g4? Maybe even f4 she wants to do. So I began thinking, and I decided, sort of to prepare against f4, I decided to go knight back to d7. Now, what I really should have done is just played bishop a6, because I'm not really in any danger yet, and if she does play f4, I can now do a number of things. I mean, the thing is, like, this move, it seems a little bit threatening, but if she ever takes on e5, I mean, I'm just going to take back, and I keep a pawn in the center. And the thing is that in this kind of a structure, if she pushes too many pawns forward, she can really overextend her position and kind of be left with a lot of weaknesses. So I could even play something like rook e8, and if she plays g4, well, then I take and drop back the knight. And yeah, the dark squares are looking very weak for her. Like, I can even trade here, go bishop g5, d6 pawn I can even give away because I can take on e4. So this is what I should have done, just kind of let her play f4 and then try to exploit the weaknesses. But I decided to go back with knight to d7. One of my ideas was also, like, if she goes g4 here, I can go bishop g5 and try to challenge this bishop. I would be glad to make a trade because my bishop is obviously a lot less active than hers. And if she goes f4, we can make this trade. I put a knight on e5 here. I'm definitely happy. But she thinks for a bit, and she goes f4. And I also thought for a while, and I kind of started to drift here a bit. So once again, I could have just played the move bishop to a6, allowed her to take, because I can always just recapture with the pawn. See, and this is another thing that I kind of messed up during the game, is that I kind of wanted to take with a knight because I felt like the knight would be great on e5. It can maybe go to c4, and maybe the e-file I could use. But I can also just as easily just take with the pawn because this is not really scary. I can always go bishop g5. Once she played f4, though, I felt like if I go bishop a6, then maybe knight b5 comes, and I didn't really want to trade off the bishop here. Although this would have been completely fine because, again, I can just kind of keep the tension. And if she ever pushes f5, again, she's kind of beginning to overextend here. I can go bishop g5, try to trade off the bishops. Like, my position is very solid. But for some reason, I just decided to be best to take on f4. I was just kind of thinking, like, she'll take back. And now I can maybe move the bishop, bring the rook to e8, try to pressure this pawn somehow. Only after she took back, I realized that, wait a minute, I just completely gave up control of a very important square, and that is the square d4. Right? Before, my pawn keeps the d4 square under control, so she cannot put a piece there, but now she has the very simple plan. She's going to go knight to d4, and she's going to bring her knight to c6. And once her knight is in my territory, that is going to be extremely annoying to deal with. So I was already very annoyed with myself for having missed this idea. And I began to once again kind of drift here. Like, I thought also that maybe I can play f5. And then I realized that this obviously doesn't work because she'll just take and go knight d4, and then my rook is hit. And once I go back, then the knight can once again jump into c6. Very unpleasant for me. My queen is under attack. This whole kind of area looks very open. So what I decided to do was go bishop a6 after spending quite a bit of time pinning this knight here, so that knight d4 immediately seems to be not playable, even though she maybe could have still gone for it because, you know, I could take the rook, but once again, once the knight hits c6, I have to move the queen out of the way, and this position, like, maybe the engine will say black is better, but I would give white some pretty good compensation for the sacrificed exchange. But she decides to go knight b5, which obviously aims to block the bishop and prepare knight d4. This is the last moment where I could have still been fine if I actually just took the knight and gone bishop f6. And I kind of just missed this idea because I felt like, maybe she just goes knight d4. What I didn't realize that I can even just trade the bishop here and give up the bishop pair completely, but the kind of idea for me is that these pawns for white are very weak, so if I just go rook e8, it's not such an easy position to play for white. Like, they have to keep the e4 pawn defended, maybe they have to go queen c2, but then I have rook c8. So, because my position is just more compact, more solid, and hers is a little bit loose, I have enough counterplay to kind of, put pressure on the center, maybe at some point even take over. But I kind of didn't see this whole idea of giving up the bishops and trying to play against the weak center, and I was already kind of in damage control mode, and I played the move rook to c8, which is a mistake because it just allows the knight in. At this point, I was prepared to just sacrifice on c6 here. This is what I basically did. I then took on e4. I thought that maybe this isn't so bad, but after a little bit, it became clear that it actually is pretty bad because she now has a pawn on c6, which is a passed pawn. I have to now constantly keep an eye on it. And just in general, like, where is my counterplay? This bishop is dead. This bishop is not great either. Like, yes, her kingside is a little bit vulnerable, but how do I exploit it? I thought about playing d5 here to kind of open up this bishop maybe, but I just felt like she can just trade here and play c7. And, okay, maybe my queen is looking to get in here, but I really just didn't like this pawn on c7. It just seemed like way too much of a problem. So I decided to play f5 instead, which allowed this check and allowed her to bring a rook to d1. I thought during the game she could have even just initiated a bunch of trades and then just taken this pawn, and it looks like, positionally, I just look busted here. This pawn is, again, very strong. This bishop doesn't really have a great future, so anyway, she decided to play rook d1. One thing I have to mention is that she was taking her time during this phase of the game where she's clearly better, but she's kind of thinking of ways to maximize her advantage. At this point, she's already down to about 20 minutes. Not that I have much more time, but the pressure is more kind of on her at this point because it's pretty clear that my position is bad, but she's the one who has to prove it. And here I decided to play knight back to f6 to sort of try to kick the queen away. I was kind of bluffing here that this pawn is like somehow poisoned. She honestly could have taken it. I just thought that if she does, my bishop can kind of come to life, but it's not really much. But she decided not to take, she decided to go back. And again, position is just horrendous for me. Like, I'm down on exchange, the rooks are bearing down, this pawn is just, I can't get rid of it. So I decided to play knight back to e8, looking to somehow control the c7 square, maybe get this bishop out. She decided to take, and she was getting low on the clock at this point. She had spent like 6 or so minutes on the previous move, and she's already down to 10 minutes here. She takes, I take back, and she goes king h1, just kind of getting out of any potential danger there. I go knight to c7, looking to maybe trade off this knight, open up the bishop. Still, my position is horrendous, but just trying to, take it move by move. She goes bishop f1 here, looking to maybe take the knight and then trade bishops, but I decide to go back. She goes rook d2. She has 5 minutes now, and we do get additional time, but only after move 40. This is move 27 currently. So she has 13 more moves to make with just 5 minutes left. Obviously, there's an increment, but she's under some pressure. I go d5. At this point, I was like, all right, she has no time. I'm just going to try to play for just crazy counterplay. So I basically allow the pawn to get captured, but because what I had actually calculated is that my queen now opens up and I get to take on f4. And suddenly, it kind of feels like my queen is in the game, my pieces are beginning to come to life, maybe I have some chances. She goes rook to d1, I bring the queen to h4, looking to play f4 and start some counterplay against her weakened king. Notice how she only has one pawn on h3 and that's it. She goes bishop to g2, f4. Like, I'm playing these moves pretty quickly. I have about maybe 12 minutes or so, and she has just a few minutes on the clock. She drops back with the queen, g5, I'm sending. King goes to g1. If she had played c7, then I was going to push g4, and the position is quite complicated because I have to watch out for this pawn, she has to watch out for mine. I was calculating all this, that maybe she plays rook d8 here and like sacks the queen, but then she takes, and then she takes the bishop, and there's all kinds of craziness. Like, I was calculating all this, and I couldn't tell what was happening. But she goes king g1. That's another kind of advantage I have now, is that she doesn't have time to really calculate all these long, complicated variations. She just has to like just take it move by move, survive for as long as it takes to get to move 40. g4. I'm just pushing. I mean, obviously, if she takes, then I take back with the bishop, and I have a skewer. I'm going to at least win back the exchange. So she goes back to f2. I keep pushing. The farther my pawns come forward, the more dangerous they are. She goes queen f3, but this actually allows me to take on h3. She could have played queen f1 to keep this pawn defended. Then I probably would have done something like bishop f6 to maybe try to go to d4. But anyway, she lets me take this pawn here, trades bishops, and now she plays c7. So she's trying to get some, obviously, play of her own. If she can promote this pawn, or if she can at least use it to distract me, that'll be great. And now I'm thinking, okay, how do I keep my attack going? I do have a check on h2, but then she goes to f1. So then I realized, wait a minute, her king is basically in a mating net. It has no moves. So how do I attack it? Well, I can play this move c4 and clear a square for my bishop. So that's what I did. And she, of course, has to somehow prepare herself for this, because if this bishop gets to c5, she's basically mated. Or, I mean, she's going to have to play rook d4 and give up the rook. So she goes queen g2. I go check. And now I have the option to trade, of course, but I don't want to, because without my queen, my attack loses a lot of steam. I, of course, drop back to g4, and my threat is very simple. Once I get f3 in, my pawns are going to just roll her king right over. So, of course, she can't allow that. She's going to have to move her queen, and I thought that she was going to move it to e4, and all I could see here is that I could give another check, and she's going to go back, and then basically it's just going to be a perpetual, because we just go back and forth. I mean, she cannot really afford to move her king, because, again, the pawns are going to roll through, and her king just has no escape. So I was fully expecting to see queen e4, but with her final move until time control, she played queen to d5, which to me seemed like a mistake, because it allows me to play f3. Even allowing her to take my bishop, but if she does, then I have check, and if she goes here, this is basically going to be mate once the queen blocks, and if she goes to g1, then this is going to be mate. She has to block with the queen, and it's going to be checkmate basically next move. But after I played f3, she goes check queen e5, and I go king g8, she goes check back. So I was like, oh, okay, so maybe I'm not winning, because she found a different sort of way to repeat moves and create a perpetual. But then I thought, wait a minute, what if I don't go back to h8? I also have the moves king to g7 and rook to f7 available. So what should I do? If you want, you can pause and think about, what would you do in this situation? Would you go king h8? Would you try to be bold and go king g7, or try to block with the rook? A lot of very complicated options here. So king to g7, if I were to play this move, what I didn't like was that she can play this check, and my king can go to g6. I didn't really see if this was like winning or losing. I wasn't sure, because it seems like my king is safe, but I also didn't realize that there's this check. I mean, I guess I thought king h6, but if I had calculated further, it turns out that after this rook sacrifice, and she goes rook to d7, eventually what happens is I am going to get checked here, and there's this check, queens get traded, and then she promotes not to a rook but to a queen, and this is winning for whites, because then she collects the bishop. So King g7 was not the move. That's why I decided to play rook f7, because I figured like she has this check, but then I can just go to g7, and she has basically no more checks. And again, I'm threatening the check with the queen. I'm threatening g2. If she sacrifices the queen for the rook and goes check here, well, she can promote. But again, I have g2, and I promote, and I am going to be the one who actually gets to her king first. So I was pretty confident at this point that I'm just winning. And then she played this move. She actually promoted to a queen, sacrificing her queen. A move which I hadn't seen because, I mean, I thought, like, why would she do that? I obviously have it covered. But what I missed was that she has this check. I did not see this one at all because, in my mind, like, I had this whole area covered, but she deflected my queen, now gives this check, and I realized that I could be in big trouble here because the next move, no matter what, is this. Check with the rook. And I have to block. Now, the good news is that if she takes my queen here, I have this check, and I thought that I have enough counterplay to still survive. But what I didn't realize is that even here I'm losing because she can pick up my queen. And if I promote on f1, then she can even take the bishop, and she's first to get to my king. I'm not in time to promote because this rook is hanging. So that actually would have already been winning for her, but she actually thought for a bit, and she found a cleaner way to win. She actually gave a check on f6, and then she sacked her queen for my rook, but then she took my queen. And in this position, I am just forced to resign because my bishop is now pinned. My pawns, you know, they look nice, but I can't do anything with them. By the time I get out of the pin, she could even sacrifice the rook for the bishop and then bring in the rook and pick up these pawns. There's just nothing I can do. My king is too far away. My pawns can't get through on their own. That's it. I'm lost. So I had a draw in my pocket. In this position, I could have just repeated with the king. But, you know, I got ambitious here. I thought that I could play for the win with this move, and I just totally missed her resource that she had, and I end up losing this game, which definitely took some wind out of my sails for me to lose in the second round to a lower-rated player. Definitely was an unpleasant experience, but there's still 4 more rounds to go, so I'm hoping to bounce back. So we're on to the next day now. This is round 3, and funny enough, I'm up against another very talented girl. This one is actually the number 1 11-year-old girl in the country. She was rated in the 1800s. I think her listed rating at the time was like high 1800s. Her live rating was a bit lower, but obviously another very talented kid, so I'm looking to bounce back. And I have to now face a Sicilian, and she plays e6, which is going to turn into the Khan variation after a6. I just go bishop d3, pretty standard. She goes knight f6, castles, queen c7. This is all pretty standard stuff. Queen e2. Normally here, black will play d6 to not allow e5, but she goes knight c6, which allows me to trade and play e5. So I'm already pretty happy. She has to now move the knight. She chooses to go back to d7, attacking the pawn on e5. So I have to find a way to defend it. I chose to go for f4, which may not have been the most accurate way. Perhaps bishop f4 was a little bit better. But my plan was to play f4 and perhaps put this bishop even on b2 at some point. And she goes knight c5, targeting my bishop. I go knight to d2. The knight from here is a little bit more flexible than it would to be on c3, because it can go maybe to c4, maybe to e4. She goes b5 here. I mean, she could have also traded from my bishop and maybe thrown in this check. Actually, I had a game that went just like this, where someone did this, and I just bring the knight to e4, and all my pieces are kind of geared up to attack the king side. She decided to go b5, though, grabbing some space on the queen side before I can try to like play a4. I played knight to e4 here, trying to oppose her knight. She just goes bishop b7, and I decided to trade off the knights. And she recaptures the bishop. That's a check. I have a choice between blocking with the bishop or moving my king in the corner, and I chose not to block because I wanted to keep my bishop on the board. And like I said, I wanted to put it on b3. Or sorry, on b2. Play b3 and put the bishop on b2. I was also the whole time, like in this middle game, I was constantly calculating f5, because if I can sort of open up the bishop this way, that would also be pretty good. But I was also kind of wary of the fact that now my e5 pawn becomes kind of a weakness, and if she's able to target it quickly, then things aren't going to be so great for me. So I decided just to play b3. At this point, she decides to drop back to e7 with her bishop, because her plan is to play c5 and activate the other one. And I could have just played bishop e2 here, but I thought c5, and my idea was actually to play c4 first, because now she can't play c5 so easily. I will just take and win a pawn. So she has to either take me on c4, or she won't be able to play c5. And once she does take, well, now her pawns are kind of split apart. So it was kind of a clever way to bait her into weakening her queenside. And then I put the bishop on b2. But she goes queen c6 now, kind of lining up this battery and saying that you don't want to be moving your queen too far away, because you're going to get checkmated on g2. What I thought that she should have done, though, is play the move g6, because, like I said, the whole time I was looking to play f5 at some point, and when she played queen c6, I decided that the time is right. And I'm threatening to play f6, which she absolutely cannot allow, because just to demonstrate, like if she plays a move like this and I get f6 in, I am just going to absolutely tear open her king side, and she's going to be in huge trouble. So she takes, and I take back with the rook. And at this point, I was pretty happy with this development, because I'm kind of targeting f7 here. I thought that maybe she could play something like queen e4 to try to trade queens, because she would be happy to take the pressure off herself, and maybe put the bishop on g6 to keep this pawn defended. My plan, though, is to then play queen f2 and try to just, again, pile pressure on the f7 pawn. If she goes bishop d5, I have this rook e1 move, and actually she's losing her bishop. But she surprised me. She played the move bishop to c8, which I just hadn't seen coming, because, you know, sometimes you just don't expect a backwards move like this. And I was like, wow, if I move my rook back right now, she's going to put her bishop on e6, and actually she just completely shuts down my attack. So what do I do? And then I realized that, wait a minute, I actually have a very nice idea here. And it didn't take me too long to see it, but it did take me a couple minutes just to calculate all of the ramifications. But I decided to play the move e6. Very unexpected move, because it seems like I'm just giving up a pawn. For what purpose? But the purpose is to clear this diagonal for the bishop. And she thought for a bit. She took the pawn. If she had played f6, then I have this move, bishop to d5, skewering the queen to the rook. So she basically has to take the pawn. If she takes it with the f pawn, then the move that I needed to find here was the fact that I can play this anyway, bishop d5. Again, skewering. And if she takes me with her pawn, I then pick up her bishop, and I have two checkmate threats. Checkmate on g7 with the queen and the bishop, and checkmate on f8 with the queen and the rook. So I'm just completely winning here. She has to basically give up her queen, like on f6. Like, that's literally the only way she stops checkmate. And yeah, if she moves the queen out of the way, then I would trade the queens, trade the rooks, and then take her rook. So taking with the pawn is out of the question. She has to take with the bishop. Now the point is that I have this move queen e5. And again, I threaten mate on g7. How does she stop me? If she plays bishop f6, guess what? I just sack. And after she takes back, this diagonal is just wide open for the queen and the bishop, and it's game over. She cannot stop mate on g7 or h8. So she, at this point, and I think she missed this queen e5 move, although she had already been in trouble. She played f6, but that just allows me to pick up the bishop. And yeah, the game is essentially over, because I just need to centralize my pieces. I won another pawn here. She can't take back because of her back rank. And in this position, she just resigned, because, I mean, I'm not allowing her any counterplay. She's down a full rook, and or sorry, a full bishop, but I mean, one piece here is more than enough to decide the game. So she decided to resign, and yeah, that was a pretty nice win. Now, as far as the rest of the tournament, I'm not going to show any more full games, but I will show some snippets of what happened. In round 4, I was playing against another teenage kid, rated just over 2,000. It was kind of a dull game. I was outplaying him with the black pieces. We got to this position around move 30, where I have the bishop pair and a little bit more space, and I'm starting to put pressure on the e4 pawn. I brought the bishop in, just kind of maneuvered a little bit, then ended up putting it on d4. Very happy for with my position at this point. I'm in control, but getting a little bit low on the clock. This is before move 40. And here he plays this move queen h5, which, I mean, just threatens to get into g6, but of course I play king g7, not allowing him to do that. He goes knight e2. And here I really started to overthink things. I considered actually sacrificing my rook, with the point that I opened up the queen and the bishop and I threatened mate, but then I saw he can just go back to g4, and it seemed unclear, like, if this is enough compensation, if it's worth it to go for. I considered playing rook d8 to defend the bishop so that I can bring the rook in. And then at the last moment I decided, okay, let's not move the rook away. Let's keep the rook pressuring the pawn. Let's move the queen to defend the bishop. Only as soon as I played this move, I hadn't even pressed the clock yet, but I had made the move and I let go, and I looked down and I realized what a horrendous blunder I had just made. I totally forgot that the queen, when it was on c6, needed to be defending the rook on e8. And I have literally just blundered a rook for nothing. And he immediately spots it. He, like, sits there for a minute and, like, tries to figure out if there's some kind of a trap. And then he just takes my rook. And I have nothing. I mean, I could try to sacrifice my bishop here and then take the knight, but it doesn't do anything. Like, he can just bring his queen. He can even just go check and take my bishop. So after he took it, I just resigned. Because, yeah, if you blunder a rook like that, you don't deserve anything. So yeah, that was, really a soul-crushing loss, because I was in control for most of the game, and then I just completely threw. Now, the last thing that I'll show you is my round 5 game. This was the last day of the tournament. I was on 2 points out of 4 at that point, which was just awful for me, but I decided just to basically YOLO things on the last day. I played against this kid who was like 1,800, and I decided to actually surprise him by playing the English, which I hadn't played in a tournament game in a while at that point, and I knew that he plays this kind of Slav system, so I decided to just go for this berserk attack with the rook g1 and g4, which is actually, like, it's a line. It's not something that I just invented, but it's pretty funny that I just decided to go for this without much preparation. I played g5 here, like saying, if you take, I'll take, and opened up the rook. He goes back. I go knight d4, and the one interesting moment was in this position where he plays a6, I take on d5, and he plays c5, and my knight's actually trapped. Like, on the move previous, I could have played f4 before he got c5 in, and actually saved my knight. But I didn't like that I dropped the pawn maybe on h2, even though it should probably still be fine. Anyway, I basically allowed him to trap my knight, took on e4, and sacrificed my piece for 3 pawns, which was not a very sound sacrifice according to the computer, but it worked, because he plays f5 here, I take en passant, and in this position he makes a fatal mistake. He plays h6, missing f4. Very powerful move, because his knight is now kicked. If he goes back, my knight is coming to e6, my queen is coming in. He decides to take, but now I take, and I actually am forking his bishop and his knight, and things go from him being, like, objectively fine to objectively not being fine at all. He goes back to e7, and I proceed to just steamroll him. d6, I throw in this check, I take his knight, and it's game over. Like, it ended that quickly. I just absolutely barged in. I mean, I didn't even have to castle. His king gets blown open, and he's getting checkmated. So that was just kind of a funny game, because a little bit dubious attack, but it worked. The last game I'm not going to show you because it was very long and kind of technical, but I managed to get the win against another kid who was like maybe low to mid 1800s with black. It was a little bit stressful because it kind of came down to a long end game, but I managed to get the win to at least finish on 4 points out of 6. The best I could have done after a 2 out of 4 start, but still quite a disappointing event. 4 points out of 6 after having gotten 4.5 last year just felt like a step down. And I did lose a little bit of rating as well, coming just under 2100 again. The next tournament that I play will be the Eastern Open, which was about a month after this tournament. And I'm going to do something very special for that one, something that I haven't done for a while, and actually cover every game of the event. And it's an 8-round tournament. So stay tuned for that. Coming soon.